Welcome to the webinar, Supporting Infants and Toddlers with Sensory Differences. My name is Rachel Evering, and I'm an infant and toddler specialist with the Virginia Infant and Toddler Specialist Network. I'm joined today by my colleague, Jamie Wallace, who is also an infant and toddler specialist.
Thank you for joining our webinar today. Now I want to tell you a little bit about the Virginia Infant and Toddler Specialist Network, the program that I work with in the Peninsula region. The goal of our program is to increase the knowledge level and skills of those who care for infants and toddlers, whether in family day homes or in child care centers. We are grant funded, regionally based, and provide coaching, training, technical assistance, and professional development at no cost to providers serving infants and toddlers birth through 36 months in child care centers and family day homes. As we begin the webinar, I want to say thank you once again for joining us today. During our time together, we will talk about an overview of our basic sensory systems, how sensory differences can impact young children, and ways to support infants and toddlers with sensory differences. We will do this by looking at our routines and environments. We will answer these questions. Why is it important to understand the many ways infants and toddlers can respond to sensory input or sensory stimuli? How do we notice a child who may be impacted by sensory differences? In what ways can we help young children with sensory differences? As we begin, let's see how much we already know about sensory differences by taking a quick poll. The poll will be divided over 2 slides. Once this first poll is open, please check all the options that you think may impact a child with sensory sensitivity. When I start the poll, you will see all the options that you can see on the screen. Please mark all that you believe may be associated with sensory sensitivities. I'm going to start the poll now. Touch or click on all the responses that you think are true. We will see the results of the poll in just a moment. All right, this is great. Thank you so much for your participation. We have about 33%, 21, 15 in different areas. I'm gonna give you guys about 20 more seconds. All right, Rachel, we have some good percentages going here.
I see that. It's awesome.
All right, about 40 more seconds. All right, so I'm going to share our results right now. So according to our results, we have 16% when soft music is playing in the background, 33% with the feel of the tag in the back of clothing, 17% with soft or crunchy foods, 11% when using a toothbrush, that's interesting, and 23% when lights are switched on and off. Thank you so much for participating in this very first poll. Let's begin our second poll. As in the previous poll, when I start this poll, you will see all the options that you see on the screen. Please mark all that you believe may be associated with sensory sensitivities. I'm going to start the poll now. Touch or click on all responses that you think are true. We will then see the results of the poll in just a minute. All right, we're already at about 50%. Thank you guys so much for your participation. I'm gonna give you guys about, I'm gonna say 25 more seconds. Wow, we have a lot of you that are responding. Thank you for being so brave and supportive. All right, we have about 5 more seconds. All right, I'm gonna now share our results. All right, if you can see, we have 36% went with using Play-Doh or finger paint, 32% when a buzzer or alarm sounds, 88% when walls are busy with posters or artwork, 11% with the hum of lights, 13% with soft touch. Thank you so much for your participation. All these items that were in the 2 polls, when soft music is playing in the background, with the feel of the tag in the back of clothing, or with seams in socks or jeans, with soft or crunchy foods, when using a toothbrush, when lights are switched on and off, using Play-Doh or finger paint, when a buzzer or alarm sounds, when walls are busy with posters or artwork, with the hum of lights, or with soft touch, represent situations or things that may make children uncomfortable when they have sensory differences. You will notice there is no one size fits. Some toddlers may prefer crunchy food, some soft food. One child may prefer a different fabric than another. A child with a sensory difference may easily get upset or feel frustrated when having to deal with this type of sensory input in their environment. They have no way to understand, explain, or control what they feel. It is up to us to notice their response and modify whatever the stimuli is that causes them to be uncomfortable or to feel overwhelmed. Most of the information for today's webinar comes from a professional resource book titled Raising a Sensory Smart Child, the Definitive Handbook for Helping Your Child with Sensory Processing Issues by Lindsay Bayel and Nancy Pesky. Lindsay Bayel is a pediatric occupational therapist who specializes in helping children with autism, sensory processing issues, developmental delays, and other challenges. Nancy Pesky is a freelance writer, editor, and book publishing consultant, and a mother of a child with sensory processing issues. This book is one of the most complete resources available that is written for those who want to understand sensory processing issues in order to help children. As we continue to discuss today's topic, let's begin by defining what we mean by the term sensory processing so that we all have a shared understanding. As defined in the resource book we just mentioned, sensory processing refers to how people use the information provided by all the sensations coming from within the body and from the external environment. Let's explore this a little bit more. The authors go on to explain, We usually think of the senses as separate channels of information, but they actually work together to give us a reliable picture of the world and our place in it. Your senses integrate to form a complete understanding of who you are, where you are, and what is happening around you. The key words underlined come together to remind us that senses work together. Because your brain uses information about sight, sounds, textures, smells, tastes, and movement in an organized way, you assign meaning to your sensory experiences and you know how to respond and behave accordingly. For example, if you are in a shopping mall or an airport and detect a sweet, powerful aroma in the air, you are able to identify the smell as a chocolate chip cookie or cinnamon buns and realize you must be walking near a restaurant, bakery, or cookie shop. You may like the smell and may begin to feel hungry as the smell lingers in your nose, or you may walk faster to get away from the scent if you do not enjoy that smell. As an adult, you are able to identify that you don't like the smell and solve the problem by moving away. You are not dependent on anyone else to read your cue that you do not like the smell and to move you from the smell. Infants and toddlers have not yet gained experiences to successfully identify dislikes and are often unable to modify or change their responses. In any event, your senses picked up on the input that you were receiving and immediately provided you with information that helped inform your response. With this in mind, Rachel will now discuss sensory processing challenges.
Thanks, Jamie. So now that we have a broad understanding of what it means when we refer to sensory processing, we may wonder just how common sensory processing challenges are in children. Dr. A. Jean Ayers was a leading occupational therapist who laid the groundwork for understanding sensory integration challenges. In the 1970s, she recognized that impaired or atypical sensory integration interfered with learning and development in the children with whom she worked. Since then, many occupational therapists and other professionals have built on Dr. Ayers' work and have reported that approximately 10 to 15% of children may be impacted by sensory processing challenges. They've found that different sensory preferences and intolerances impact play, learning, social interactions, and everyday activities such as eating, getting dressed, taking a bath, brushing teeth, washing hair, and even falling asleep. They've also found that there are specific techniques and strategies that can help improve a child's ability to integrate, tolerate, and respond to sensory information. Today, professionals such as pediatric occupational therapists are highly trained to help children and their families when impacted by sensory processing or sensory integration challenges. While we will not be discussing the entire range or spectrum of sensory processing issues, we want to help bring awareness to this topic because sensory differences are very common in young children. Sensory differences can be grouped into 3 different categories. The first group is children with sensory differences that are generally hypersensitive or highly sensitive. The second group is children who are hyposensitive or undersensitive. The third and final group are children who are a mixture of both related to certain sensory input or stimuli. A child's range of sensitivity is unique to each child and may vary with the environment or how a child is feeling on a particular day. Today, we're going to focus mostly on children who seem to be hypersensitive, which we can refer to as highly sensitive to sensory input. Being hypersensitive to certain stimuli or sensory input is not something a young child understands or can control. That's why it's very important for adults who care for young children to be aware of these differences, how common they are, and how to provide support. Different children will have their own unique responses to different sensory stimuli as every child has a unique sensory profile. as in the examples that were shared just a moment ago of dislikes for crunchy versus soft foods and loud versus soft music. Children who are highly sensitive to certain sensory stimuli feel their senses very strongly and tend to react to the feelings very strongly as well. At times, their reactions may seem out of proportion or extreme compared to what other children may be feeling, or how other children react in similar situations with similar sensory stimuli. A common example of this is the child who can feel the seams in their socks or the tag in the back of their shirt. The sensory impact, this feeling of the seam or the tag, is extreme for a child with a sensory sensitivity to this tactile stimuli, this feeling of touch. For a child with this sensory sensitivity, this is a very real feeling, a very real sensitivity, and it's not something the child is making up or pretending to be feeling. For other children, the seams in their socks or the tags in their shirts are not something they even notice. However, for a child with sensory sensitivities to this stimuli, sensitivities to the sensory input, the feeling can be overwhelming and create challenging issues when getting dressed every day. For a child sensitive to noises, there may be many periods through the day causing feelings of being overwhelmed. This can include crashing blocks, musical instruments, and even loud voices. When children are highly sensitive to certain sensory input, we need to be aware of their needs, develop an empathy for how they feel, and learn how to provide the support that they need. Furthermore, when we notice that an infant or toddler has a sensory difference that impacts his or her daily life and the ability to play or learn, we need to encourage parents to consider a referral to early intervention for strategies to help their child at home and across settings that include their childcare environment. Often, these professionals, once working with an infant or toddler, are able to provide observations and guidance to early care providers. Children who are hypersensitive, and again, that's highly sensitive, to certain input may tend to avoid that stimuli and sensation whenever possible. An older child may be able to gain a degree of control over the stimuli or sensory input, which can bring a sense of relief, such as in our earlier example of being able to walk away from the unfavorable smell of cookies or cinnamon rolls at the mall. However, infants and toddlers basically have no control over their environment and rely on adults to figure out and respond to their needs in nurturing and caring ways. Imagine if you were a toddler who's very sensitive to bright lights and sounds, and you go to a childcare center where there are many children, lots of talking and other noises, background music playing and fluorescent lights on all the time. Remember, many people who are highly sensitive to sounds can hear the hum of fluorescent lights. Wow, this environment we just described would be a real challenge. You would be in a constant state of sensory overload with no way to express your extreme discomfort or to avoid or even reduce the stimuli. I think we can all empathize in this situation. As an early care provider, you want to be able to observe these signs in your infants and toddlers and know how to best help them. In order for us to know how to help children with sensory sensitivities, let's first talk about the various senses and discuss ways to observe children for possible responses to sensory stimuli. Please keep in mind, as we discuss these areas, we are addressing only hypersensitivity to stimuli. There are infants and toddlers who have hyposensitivity to stimuli who will present very differently. We will briefly address that area a little later in our time together. Let's first talk about the sense of touch. Touch is the most basic and primal sense that we have. It is the first sense to develop prenatally and the largest sensory system in the body. There are tactile or touch receptors on the outer layer of our skin, as well as in the mouth, throat, digestive system, ear canals, and more. And the tactile system encompasses many types of touch. Let's take a moment to focus on one type of touch, light touch. Light touch includes things like having someone softly touch you or brush up against your skin, feeling grass, sand, or dirt on your skin, or having your hands, face, body, or hair washed. Additionally, it can include brushing your teeth, having certain textures of food in your mouth, feeling certain clothing, fabric, or textures on your skin, and more. Children with sensory differences to tactile input may try to avoid the stimuli of light touch because it feels overwhelming to them. If you notice a child who seems to be sensitive to these types of touch, you'll want to observe them more closely. When you observe a child for possible sensitivities to touch, you can begin by answering some of the following types of questions. Does the child seem uncomfortable with certain types of clothing or fabric, such as blankets or carpets, seams, tags, maybe even waistbands or cuffs or their diapers? Does the child avoid new foods or dislike particular textures or temperatures of food in their mouth? Some examples are soft noodles versus crackers for texture, or warm oatmeal versus cold yogurt for temperature. Does the child avoid being close to other people or seem uncomfortable or upset when touched, picked up, or hugged? Maybe this is a toddler you observe who might prefer to play alone and becomes upset when a friend gives him a hug. Does the child avoid touching things like paint, Play-Doh, sand, maybe grass, or similar items? This could be a child you have observed who doesn't enjoy walking in the grass, playing in the water station, or even finger painting. Does the child seem upset when socks or shoes are put on, or when diapers or waistbands are fastened? Observing for these cues will provide you with a much greater awareness of how a child responds to the tactile sensory stimuli of touch. The second sense that we're going to discuss is sight, the sense of vision. Sight refers to the ability to detect things in the environment and to have the ability to process what that visual information means. Once you understand what the sensory input means, your brain will know if it needs to respond to it, and if so, determine the best way to do that. For those with sensitivities to visual stimuli, it may be related to sensitivity to light or photosensitivity, sensitivity to movement, the ability to detect movement very easily, sensitivity to busy environments with bright colors or walls covered in pictures and artwork, or other visual stimuli that can impact sensory integration. When you observe children who may seem to be highly sensitive to visual stimuli, pay attention to the changes in their responses when in dim or natural light, rooms painted in neutral colors, and environments that have organized open spaces without clutter or movement all around. Jamie is now going to better inform us about some of the other senses. Jamie?
Thank you, Rachel. Now we've come to talk about taste and smell. The senses of smell and taste are intricately linked, and without smell, taste is minimalized. Smell is a primitive sense that has served humans well over many lifetimes, both for survival and for pleasure. Smell is closely linked to taste, but it's also closely linked to our emotions and can trigger memories that elicit reactions and responses. There are only 5 things that we can detect through taste, including salt, sweet, salty, bitter, sour, and savory, also called umami. However, there are more than 10,000 odors that we can detect. Everything we think of as taste is actually influenced by smell. Because of the close linkage, children who are sensitive to smell are generally sensitive to taste as well. For example, sensitivity to smell can influence the type of food that children will eat, but it can also influence other things like what kind of toothpaste children can use. Food sensitivities are not always linked to taste and smell, as they may be more about the texture or the temperature of food, which are tactile, touch stimuli. For example, a child may tolerate diced apples, but when the same apples are warmed and the temperature and texture changes, they may not eat those apples. Another example often seen is a child being okay with eating two separate ingredients, such as yogurt and berries, but when put together, the child will not eat mixed textures. Recognizing and understanding these sensitivities as an early child care provider can have a huge impact on the infants and toddlers in your care. Some children may also like or dislike certain foods based on sight, the visual sense of what the food looks like. Children often settle on certain foods that work for their sensitivities and may not want to eat anything else. When you observe children who may seem to be highly sensitive to odors or tastes, pay attention to changes in their responses when different stimuli are present, and work toward finding solutions that work for each child's unique sensitivities. Being sensitive to odors and taste is not something the child can control, and we need to do our best to be aware of and respond to children's needs with empathy and care. Now let's talk about proprioception. Proprioception is the internal sense that tells you where your body parts are without having to look at them, and informs things like how much force you need to pick up or set down an object. This internal awareness is dependent on receptors in your joints, muscles, ligaments, and connective tissue. Because the system typically responds in ways that are not in our consciousness, we are not usually aware of how it works. Proprioception includes things like your ability to sit on a chair or sofa without thinking about falling off, put food into your mouth without consciously thinking about where your hand and arm are, crawl under a table or through a tunnel made from an empty box and know where you are out and able to stand up without hitting your head, use the right amount of force to pick up objects such as a rock, stack objects such as blocks, and push objects such as pushing a puzzle piece into place. Children with an overly sensitive or impaired sense of proprioception may not be correcting information from their bodies. They may not seem to know where their bodies are in space, or may appear clumsy and consistently bumping into furniture or other things. When you think about the infants and toddlers in your care, do you find that some of them may be described as above? Please enter your comments into the question box. Because they may not be able to gauge or predict the weight of objects, they may use excessive force and hit themselves in the face when trying to eat, spill their juice when picking up their cup too forcefully, or hug you too tightly when expressing joy at seeing you, or they may not use enough force and drop things that they are trying to pick up, or not be able to manage the large crayon you gave them to draw with on paper. If you notice a child who seems to display these types of behaviors, you will want to observe them more closely. When you observe a child for sensory issues related to proprioception, you can begin by answering the following questions. Does the child avoid engaging in physical activities such as climbing stairs, pushing things, swinging or bouncing? Is the child hesitant to use things like crayons, pot beads, or snap together toys, or to build with blocks? Does the child avoid climbing through things like tunnels or climbing over things in their way? Does the child get upset if their eyes are covered, such as when putting on hats or clothing, or when being dried off with a towel. If a child displays issues with proprioception, having a discussion with parents and suggesting a referral to early intervention may be appropriate. Listening is a very complex auditory process that involves hearing and processing sounds. Auditory processing refers to how the central nervous system and brain recognize and make sense of sounds. Sound has many dimensions that include intensity, which is loudness measured in decibels, frequency, pitch, which is the number of sound waves per second, duration, which is how long the sound continues, localization, where the sound is coming from. Children may be sensitive to the various components of sound rather than just to the intensity or loudness of the sound. Some children may be uncomfortable with certain frequencies, such as high frequency sounds, such as high-pitched voices, ringing phones, blenders, sirens, bells, or the hum of certain lights, or low-frequency sounds, such as a lawnmower, air conditioners, the vacuum cleaner, or the hum of certain appliances or vehicles. Children may also be sensitive to the duration of sounds, such as background music that is constantly playing in a shopping center, restaurant, the car, or a child care center. Being in a group of children may increase sensitivities to sound, as a child cannot control the amount of type of sound in their environment and has no way to escape the constant stimuli or reduce their sensory input. When you notice children who seem to be sensitive to sound, pay close attention to changes in their responses when different kinds of music are played, when background music is turned off, when certain lights are turned off, especially fluorescent lights, and when auxiliary noises such as children playing with instruments or banging things together are reduced. It is important to offer a variety of experiences throughout the day to allow all children moments where sounds and other stimuli are less intense.
That was some great information, Jamie. Thanks. So now we're going to talk about the vestibular system. The vestibular system helps organize the body's response to movement, gravity, and vibration. For example, when a child bends over to pick up something from the floor or climbs a ladder, the vestibular system senses a change in relationship to gravity and helps the body adjust so that the child doesn't lose their balance. Different types of movement provide different types of vestibular stimulation, and the body reacts to and interprets the information to help maintain balance and equilibrium. The auditory system is closely connected to the vestibular system because both sensory systems are situated within the inner ear, and their sensory receptors work the same way. Anytime that you move, your motion or movement activates your auditory receptors. And every time that you hear a sound or experience auditory stimulation, it activates your gravity or movement receptors. For example, when you hear a loud sound, it generally results in being startled, which we often experience as a quick jerk of the body. Hearing music, which also impacts the auditory system, stimulates the vestibular system, and you just might start dancing when you hear a song or a rhythm that you like. The vestibular system also helps organize all sensory input that the body experiences. If a child's vestibular system does not have strong connections with all the other senses, the child isn't able to receive or interpret sensory information in a reliable way. That may mean that the child's equilibrium may be challenged, and they will not have a sense of physical or emotional security when moving, such as walking, running, spinning, rolling, swinging, climbing, and more. Children with sensory sensitivities may not be sending reliable information to the vestibular system and may be challenged when it comes to moving their body or maintaining their balance or equilibrium. If you notice a child who seems to be exhibiting difficulty in this area, you'll want to observe them more closely. For example, when you observe the child, you can begin by answering the following types of questions. Does the child seem to lose their balance easily when cruising along furniture, for example, learning to walk, or after they have learned to walk? Does the child avoid movements like spinning, rolling, bending, dancing, maybe even swinging, or do they seem to get dizzy quickly if moving in those ways? Is the child hesitant or fearful to climb things like stairs or low playground structures? If a child routinely exhibits issues related to balance and equilibrium, it's best to refer the parents to an infant and toddler early intervention program for additional assessment. There's another important sensory system that not many people talk about, and it's called interoception. Interoception completes the sensory picture of how we experience ourselves within the environment in which we live. Interoception refers to the sensory input we receive from our stomach, bladder, colon, heart, and other internal organs. It sends us information to let us know that we're hungry or thirsty, need to urinate, are cold or hot, maybe feel nauseated, fatigued, need to catch our breath, and many more things. We are often not consciously aware of these sensations unless we focus on them or something changes that brings them to our attention, such as the urgent need to use the bathroom. Some children are more aware of their interoception system and sense the way their internal body feels more intensely. For example, when a child with sensory sensitivities gets hungry, they may have a sudden need to eat, and nothing is going to go well in their world until their body's need for food has been met. When some children become fatigued, regardless of whether or not it's nap time, they'll have a hard time dealing with anything else unless they are able to sleep. Their interoception sensory system makes them keenly aware of how they feel internally, and their needs must be met in order to achieve a sense of comfort and equilibrium. Before we advance to our next section, where we're going to discuss how to support these sensory differences, I just want to again remind everyone that we have been discussing only children who are hypersensitive. Children who are hyposensitive respond very differently to stimuli. For example, they may appear to highly enjoy or even appear to crave sensory inputs such as loud noises. They enjoy the busyness of the day. They may want to play musical instruments extra loud. They like to spin and jump, and oftentimes safety can be a concern. These children who are hyposensitive may also like to get dirty, play in the mud, and decide that finger painting should be a whole body experience. They may enjoy rough surfaces, quite the opposite of their friends with hypersensitivity who avoid sand, grass, and rocks. These infants and toddlers may also be noted to appear heavy-handed, doing things like placing puzzle pieces with extra force, slamming the next block onto the tower, causing it to fall. Can you think of any young children in your care who might be described as hyposensitive or craving that extra stimulus? Please indicate your answer in the question box.
All right, I will give you guys a couple of seconds to provide some answers in the question box regarding if you've come to or experienced any children that were described as hyposensitive?
We are getting a lot of yeses. Yes, yes, yes. I know someone like that.
I see. I've had several. Yes, yes. Most definitely. I remember I had a little one. They weren't really aware of their force. So whenever they would see me, yes, they absolutely love Miss Jamie. However, when they would come hug me, it was like a dump truck was throwing themselves against my little tummy.
Yeah.
Yes, I have one. Please, I need to take a picture for previous page. All right, look at that. So we have had those that have experienced that, yes. So we have those that are hypersensitive, and then we have those that are hyposensitive. Thank you guys for sharing. Thank you so much for being brave in your participation.
So just as a reminder, referrals are a great place to start, even if their children are experiencing hypersensitivity or hyposensitivity. So just keep in mind the same for both types of children. Early interventionists and pediatric occupational therapists can help with all of these things as well. And Jamie is now going to help us develop some supportive strategies for our infants and toddlers.
Thank you so much, Rachel. Now that we have awareness of the various senses and how they work, we can focus on strategies to support not only infants and toddlers with sensory differences, but strategies that support all our children. Tuning into each child is the first strategy that allows us to create an awareness of each child's needs and how they experience and respond to the world around them. By being willing to look at each child with a fresh perspective, we can change our expectations in a way that supports them and their uniquely wonderful characteristics and personalities. No two children are the same, just as no two adults are the same. By embracing a caring approach to nurturing each child, we will be able to make modifications that provide loving and responsive environments. By knowing what sensory stimuli might cause children to be uncomfortable, we can adjust our routines and our environments to bring as much comfort and support as we can day by day. Now let's take a look at ways that we might modify our routines and environments to support children with sensory differences. When we look at our daily routines with young children, we want to be sure we allow flexibility to meet all of the needs of the children and to be especially supportive of children who may have sensory differences. Let's reflect on some questions to help us consider if our routine is meeting the needs of children, such as, do we allow children to eat whenever they are hungry, to get a drink whenever they are thirsty? It is critical that infants and toddlers are given food and water whenever they need it. Their bodies are constantly growing and changing, and they need to be nourished throughout the day rather than only at scheduled times. Another question to consider when thinking about whether our routine meets the needs of our children is, do we allow adequate time to transition from one activity to another without children being rushed or feeling confused? Children who have sensory differences may not respond well to rushed or disorganized transitions because of an overload of sensory stimuli. They need to know what is coming next, and it is important that we talk to them and explain transitions every day. Infants and toddlers can understand a lot more language, and they can express and be narrating the transitions of the day, every single day. We help them by providing a context for what is happening in the world around them. And that can help to reduce the feeling of too much stimuli coming at them during transition times. This can be done by showing children what is next in addition to telling them. Using a visual schedule may also support this. Here's the next question to consider. Are we nurturing in the way we approach certain caregiving routines, making sure that children are sensitive to certain things that are comfortable? So for example, is the changing area in place where there's natural light or dim light rather than in an area with a bright ceiling light right above the changing table? When we put clothing on children, do we make sure that the child responds well to the texture and feeling of the clothing? And one more question related to our routines. Do we allow children to choose their own activities, child directed, rather than telling them where or how they should play, teacher directed? For example, children show preferences for certain types of activities, books, or toys at a very young age. When we provide activities for infants and toddlers, we need to allow them to choose their own activities instead of telling them where or how they should engage in them. Giving children a choice of where to play or how to engage in an activity is a nurturing and responsive approach to caregiving. For example, are there options for activities such as a swing or playing on a blanket during outside time? Other examples would be to offer choices for snack. For example, yogurt with berries on top or on the side, crunchy apples or applesauce. Other different materials for art. Use your finger, a cotton swab, or paintbrush to paint. We will also talk about the environment and changes we can consider. But before doing so, what other reflections do you have when thinking of ways to make sure your routine supports children with sensory differences and embraces a nurturing and responsive approach to caregiving? If you have any ideas and would like to share them, please enter your comments into the question box and we'll read some of them.
All right, somebody mentioned the ability to move around, freedom to move around the classroom. That would help with that. So I think that's a good suggestion. Consistent routines and consistency with transitions. That's also a really important one. All right, that's some great suggestions. Thank you guys so much for that.
Yeah, thank you for sharing your thoughts. Rachel will now take over for reflective environment.
Thanks, Jamie. So we're going to take a moment to reflect on our environments. When we look at the environment that we have created for young children, we want to be sure that we are supportive of children who might have sensory differences and that we consider the needs of all of the children. So let's consider some questions to help us reflect on whether our environment is supportive of children in our care. The first question is the environment organized and not cluttered? This is important to consider because children who are hypersensitive may not do well in cluttered spaces. Cluttered and disorganized spaces are full of sensory stimuli, and that can feel like chaos to these children. Infants and toddlers who are sensitive to sensory input may be very uncomfortable in cluttered or disorganized spaces, even to the point of being overwhelmed and very upset in these types of environments. If there are pictures you want to put on a wall, consider doing so in one specific area versus throughout the entire room. Hallways can often be a great place for wall displays and child-produced art. The next question is there predictability in where things are located so that children can find the book they like, the toy they enjoy playing with, the soft cushion they like to sit on, and more? All children benefit from knowing where to find the things they like to play with or the items they rely on for comfort. Imagine walking into your kitchen or bedroom and noticing that things had been moved around and put in a new place. How would you respond to that? Most of us would find that to be a bit unsettling, to say the least. When there are changes made to the childcare environment, even small changes like moving items to different places, it's helpful for those changes to be made in a way that provides a sense of familiarity. If you're going to rearrange the environment, do that slowly by changing only one or two things at a time so that children have time to adapt to these changes. Also, providing picture cues, such as a picture of a toy on the outside of the container, can help children easily find items in a non-cluttered environment. And when children return to care after changes had been made, be sure to show them where to find the things that they like in that rearranged environment. Another question to consider, is the environment calm and comforting? Environments that have brightly painted walls or furniture in bright primary or secondary colors can be overwhelming to young children because of the sensory stimuli that meets them at the door. With so many different colors, they may not know where to focus their eyes, which may become quite overwhelming. The most calming and comforting environments are those with muted, neutral tones on the walls, such as tan, beige, or gray, and furniture that reflects nature-based colors, like wood tones, light brown or tan, maybe even muted green or blue colors. Children who are highly sensitive to sensory stimuli generally relax a lot more in environments with calm, warm tones than in environments with bright colors that overwhelm their sensory system. Now let's consider this question. Do the walls have lots of open space on them so children can relax their eyes when looking around? Just like bright colors, walls filled with pictures, artwork, or posters can be overwhelming to young children and to many adults as well. Walls that have lots of open space and are painted in calm, neutral colors provide relief from sensory stimuli and allow children and adults to relax when looking around their environment. During our February webinar, we discussed environments, and for those of you who participated, this may look familiar. It's a great example of how this can be achieved. What other reflections do you have when thinking of ways to make sure your environment supports children and embraces a nurturing and responsive approach to caregiving? If you'd like to, you can share some ideas with us in the question box.
All right, I think we give them a few seconds to respond. Nurturing and responsive caregiving. So super important, especially with our little ones, our infants and toddlers.
And someone mentioned organization, keeping things organized, interesting. Not a lot of electronic toys that make lots of sounds. That's a good point as well.
Absolutely.
And thank you guys so much for sharing all your thoughts during today's webinar. Jamie, will you wrap us up with some additional ideas and resources?
Sure. So during our time together today, we talked about an overview of our basic sensory systems, how sensory differences can impact young children, and ways to support infants and toddlers with sensory differences by looking at our routines and environments. Again, this webinar provides a very general overview of the topic of children with sensory differences, particularly those who are hypersensitive. Raising a sensory smart child is a great starting point for additional information. Also, as previously mentioned, contacting early intervention is also another consideration. Sensory differences are real, and they are a combination of many factors. Each child has a unique profile related to sensory processing. It is only through assessment and consultation with a professional, such as an early interventionist, who specializes in pediatric occupational therapy, can we understand and be better equipped to meet the needs of individual children. Thankfully, children who exhibit sensory challenges often respond well to therapy provided by trained experts in the field, especially when providers are involved and able to implement strategies during routines. If you notice a child who seems to have sensory differences, please refer the parents to your local infant and toddler early intervention service, a service that is provided for families of infants and toddlers at no cost. The sooner that a child can be assessed, the sooner that the child, family, and caregiver can be supportive. As providers, there are many additional resources you may find helpful to understanding and providing the right type of support. These include sensorysmarts.com, Center for Parenting Education.org, brainbalancecenters.com, childmind.org, and thechildcenter.com. And if you would like a copy of the references provided, please feel free to take a picture. These are great additional resources that you yourself can use for the little ones in your classroom, and resources that you can provide to your parents and your families. There is a one-page handout for today's webinar in the handout section of your webinar task panel. If you would like to download and save this handout or print it, please do that now. If you are unable to access the handout, you can let myself or you can let Miss Rachel know after the webinar, and we will send the handout to you. Here are Rachel and I's contact information. Rachel Levering, Eastern Region. Her email is rdcarlo@va-itsnetwork.org. And you have myself, Jamie Wallace, with the Peninsula region, and my email is jwallace@va-itsnetwork.org. Before we close and I share certificate information, I'd like to share that these webinars are recorded and available on our website. There are some additional webinars available on supporting children with sensory differences, as well as the previously mentioned webinar on environments that you may enjoy. Thank you for joining us today for supporting infants and toddlers with sensory differences. If you would like to receive a certificate of participation for attending this webinar, please complete the training evaluation that will appear after we close the session. We would really appreciate your thoughts and feedback. The training evaluation will automatically appear on your screen when the training session is closed. Once we receive your evaluation, your certificate will be forwarded to you by the end of the month. If you are not able to complete the virtual evaluation at this time, or you attended the training session as part of a group, you can still receive a certificate. If you attend a live presentation, complete the evaluation that appears on your screen after the training session is closed, or download the training evaluation from our website at va-itsnetwork.org. Email or fax the completed evaluation to the email address provided on the form. If you view a recorded presentation, download the training evaluation from our website at va-itsnetwork.org. Email or fax the completed evaluation to the email address provided on the form. And thank you. Please remember to check the Virginia ITSN website, va-itsnetwork.org, for more great training sessions that are available to you. Join us for Building Reflective Connections with Toddlers on May 12, 2022. We look forward to receiving your feedback, and thank you for attending.